نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, as we begin every Jum'ah, with praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, thanking Him, seeking refuge in Him from the evil of ourselves and the evil consequences of our own misdeeds. And we remind ourselves that whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to be guided, none will misguide them. And whomever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to be misguided, none may serve as a guide for them except Allah. And we bear witness and testify that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His slave and His messenger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands the believers to have the taqwa, the awareness, the fear, the consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is due to Him, and to not die except in the state of Islam. When the people of Gaza attacked Israel on October 7th, I'm sure there were a lot of us who saw those videos and we felt happy, we felt courage, we felt excited to see these things. I left the masjid when I was in Florida when this happened, and a young man, 18 years old, high school, mashallah, he walked straight up to me and he said, "I'm ready, Umar, let's go." You know, he was so excited. And in all of this, we got excited and we wanted to do the same. And I think now that we've been sitting so long, 8 months or so after this, I think it's imperative for us all to realize that that is their test and we have our own. And may Allah give them victory soon. And maybe we all feel a sense of shame that Allah chose them for something and didn't choose us. That Allah picked them to be shuhada and didn't pick us. And perhaps we feel guilt that there's nothing we can do. And perhaps we feel shame that we are complicit in some way. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us. After all, they've been chosen for some jihad to defend their honor and their land and their people and the deen. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept them as shuhada. But rather than feeling less than, maybe we should ask ourselves, is our goal truly different from the goal of Ahl al-Gaza? Is what we want with our lives different than what they want with their lives? And what can I do to be like them? To have such conviction, trust in Allah, to have the strength to suffer what they are suffering, and to not sacrifice their iman in the process. It is only that Allah invited them to this and wanted them to have this status, and for us to learn from this. In the well-known hadith of Ibn Abbas, Abdullah ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhuma, the Prophet ﷺ says, "Ihfadh Allah tajidhu amamak." Be mindful of Allah and you will find Him in front of you. Ta'arraf ila Allah fi ar-rikha' ya'rifuka fi ash-shidda. Recognize and acknowledge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in times of ease, and Allah will remember you in times of difficulty. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَا أَخْطَأَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُصِيبَكَ وَمَا أَصَابَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُخْطِئَكَ. Know that whatever has passed you by was not going to come to you, And what has come to you was never going to pass you by. وَأَلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ. And know that victory comes with patience. وَأَنَّ الْفَرَجْ مَعَ الْكَرْبِ. Relief with affliction. وَأَنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ يُسْرًا. And hardship comes with ease. The reality is, many of us, at least my generation, I can speak for myself, and the generations younger than myself, we have this delusion where we think we're only successful in this life in the eyes of Allah. At least I know I feel this, with major good deeds. I have to write a book, I have to memorize the Quran, I have to become a scholar, I have to do this, I have to do that. If only I could fight in jihad, I'd be good, Allah would give me Jannah. If only I had money, I would give it in sadaqah. If only, if only, if only. If only I was over there, they would see what I would do. It is no simple thing, my dear brothers and sisters, to say you're in a situation you're going to die shaheed. To say in a situation if you had money you would give it. It is no simple thing to know how you will act in a different situation. And if even for a split second your ikhlas diverts from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're done. It's not accepted by Allah. The reality is we often overlook the small deeds. The small deeds that can help us work our way up, right? And this is a trap of shaitan. Shaitan wants us to wait for the big things. Don't look at the little things. Look at what everybody else is doing and make yourself feel small and worthless. And it is the small things, my dear brothers, brothers and sisters, we need to focus on. We need to remind ourselves of the small things every day that we can do to compete with our brothers and sisters, to compete with those who went before us, to not lose sight of the blessing, the ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us in our lives. And this is something we are lacking here today. Here in Memphis we see this. I hear it from so many elders. So many elders come to me and complain, Umar, why don't our young men, they sit after salah? Why do they sit in the back of the masjid and talk while everybody is waiting for salah? I didn't do this as a kid. I would go sit have you heard this? When we observe the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, how much attention has been given just to the adhkar of the Prophet ﷺ. Just the adhkar. You ask any child, what's the dua for entering the restroom? What's the dua for leaving the bathroom? They know it. But do they know why? What's the purpose behind all of this mentioning? What's the purpose for all of these things? We all know, let me give you an example of the importance of these small deeds. We know after salah, we should sit and make tasbih. And we heard the story from the sunnah that the impoverished Sahaba were, they felt bad that the wealthy Sahaba, they had more than them to give. And the Prophet ﷺ said, you can do the tasbihat. Too often, what do we do after salah? We get up and rush back to the dunya immediately. Too often, we treat the salah like we just got the thing done and we're good. Yallah, I'm going to Jannah, we're done. Too often, we don't realize that there is more to our lives with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than simply going through the routines of every fard. Of course, there's nothing haram with anybody getting quickly up after the salah. If they have a need, no problem. But let's think about the reward and the consequences. The Prophet ﷺ says, the angels make dua for any of you so long as you remain in the place of your prayer, and so long as you continue to do that, the angels will say, Allahumma ghfir lah, Allahumma arham. May Allah forgive him and may Allah have mercy on him. Just for sitting. Look how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Just for sitting in the masjid, just for sitting where you were praying, the angels are coming to make dua for you. But we forget, myself included, we forget. Shaitan guides us away, pulls us away. Run back to the dunya. And we complain again that our boys don't do this. They cannot sit still. They have no discipline. And the question is, did they see me doing that as well? The Prophet ﷺ, Salama radiallahu anha, she said, when the Prophet ﷺ used to finish the prayer, the women would stand up and leave, and the Prophet ﷺ would remain sitting for a while, and the companions would sit there as well. And she says, Allah knows best, Allahu alam, but we think the Prophet did this so the women would be able to leave before any of the men noticed. Just think about this for a second. Sitting in the masjid doing nothing, sitting after salah doing nothing, to prevent fitan, to prevent men from looking at women, to prevent men of their natural inclination to look at women, just sitting out of salah doing nothing. How much khair comes from it? How much good comes from it? How merciful is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My dear brothers, I know this is a tangent, but many of our brothers, our young brothers, our youth, we see them leaving off these sunan, leaving off these things that we grew up with as young men, leaving off these things that we used to see our fathers doing and our grandfathers doing. And we think it's their fault. We blame them. We blame the youth for their inability to follow the sunnah, for their inability to do what you and I did. Wallahi, it's not their fault. We need to look at ourselves and ask ourselves, am I being the role model for them, or am I waiting for somebody else to come and be the role model? Am I going to sit with my son after salah? Am I going to wake him up for fajr and bring him to the masjid? Or am I going to put excuses in front of me, like I have work, and I have a job, and I have this, and I have that? If you don't do it for your sons, who's going to do it for them? Wallahi, imagine if every single one of us, including myself, we did one of these small things for our sons, one of these small things for our boys. After salah, ta'al habibi, yalla, come sit. Don't go run to your friends. But no, we have a problem of people in this community. They drive by the masjid, the masajid. They drop their sons off at the masjid with nobody with them. And the salah is ongoing. And the boys do not come to salah. Whose fault is it? And we're saying we're going to go for jihad, we're going to go and do this if we were over there. May Allah forgive us. Small deeds. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, whoever recites Ayatul Kursi after every prescribed prayer, there is nothing standing between him and entry into Jannah but his death. If we were honest with ourselves, if I was honest with myself, how often do we actually do this? Once a month, once a week? Is it a habit? Don't overlook the small deeds. Every time, my dear brothers and sisters, we get up from salah quickly, every time we come late to the masjid, every time our sons see us sleeping for fajr, or don't go to the masjid for fajr, every time they see it, it puts in their mind that this isn't important, that a man doesn't do this. They're not learning how to be men from us. They're learning it from TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube. So if we want to see any change within our youth, it's all on us. Nobody's going to come and save them. we have to be there for each other and help each other. One of the most beloved hadith to me is a hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, which he tells us that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam narrated a story of 3 men from a previous nation. They were traveling. They advised me to tell the brothers, move up a bit and make room in the back, inshallah, if you can do so. These 3 men were traveling and some bad weather came and they sought refuge in a cave. And when they entered the cave, a rock came in front of the entrance of the cave and trapped them in. So they're wondering what to do when one of them says, Wallahi, the only way we're going to get out of this cave is if we call upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the good deeds that we have done. So one of them, he makes dua. He says, Ya Allah. He says, Ya Allah, it was my habit that any time I had milk from my animals, I would serve my parents first. And Ya Allah, one time, my parents had fallen asleep before I can give them the milk. And my children were crying, Ya Allah. They were hungry. And I held on to the milk and I prevented my children, Ya Allah, so that I can give my parents that milk before the children. And he says, if I did it for your sake, Ya Allah, remove us from this calamity, from the cave. And the rock moved a bit. The second man says, Ya Allah, there was a beautiful woman that I used to love with all my heart, as a man loves a woman. And he says, I went to her and I asked her to be with me in haram. And she declined. She said no. And he tells Allah, Ya Allah, and we were in a time of famine. There was no food. And she came to me and asked for help. And I gave her some amount of dirham. In order for me to give it to her, she had to give herself to me. He said, Ya Allah, when I laid up above her, she said, Ittaqillah, fear Allah. And he said, Ya Allah, I removed myself from this situation because I feared you. If I did it out of my fear of you, remove the rock. And the rock moved a little bit. And the last one, he had some workers on his farm. And one of them left before he got his pay. So the man took the money that was owed to the person and invested it. Until many years later, the guy comes back and says, where's my wealth? Where's my salary? Where's what you owed me? He says, I invested it. This whole valley you see before you, and all of the sheep and all of the camels and all of everything here is yours. Take it. He tells Allah, and he took it, and I didn't ask for anything. If I did it for your sake, Ya Allah, remove us from this calamity. And the rock moved. There's so many benefits to be taken from this hadith. But we don't have time to dig into it all. Just look at the small deeds. We don't need big giant deeds to save ourselves. We don't need enormous things, small things. And remember the woman who saved herself from Jahannam by virtue of feeding a dog or giving a dog some water. Showing honor and respect to parents. How simple is it? How simple is it to show a kindness to parents? And we ask why our sons do not respect us. And we ask why our children speak so harshly to us. Did they see you show karam and kindness to your parents? Did they see you walk your father? Did they see you do this? Did they see you do that? Small deeds. Remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at times of weakness. Remembering Allah and stopping oneself from sin. Lowering your gaze. Turning away. Shutting off the TV. Turning the phone down. Putting locks. Whatever it is. Small deeds. Putting barriers between yourself and sayyat. Safeguarding the wealth of Muslims. Being generous without expectation of a return. Taking care of an amana with ihsan. How often do we get something and we ruin it and we give it back to the person ruined or destroyed? We borrow a brother's car and we give it back to him, it's dirty. And although these deeds were small, think about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala preserved these deeds until Yawm al-Qiyamah for us to learn from. We don't know the names of these people in the cave, but we know what they did. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us and bless us with consistency in our small deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for ikhlas with thibat. Allahumma inna na'udhu bika min al-hammi wal-hazan wa min al-ajzi wal-kasal wa min al-jubli wal-bukhl wa min dala' ad-dayni wa qahr al-rijal. أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه غفور رحيم. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. My dear brothers and sisters, I've shown how easy it is to earn Allah's pleasure. And the fact of the matter is, we know that tasbihat is just a small thing. Wallahi, it's a small example. But the Prophet ﷺ even made it easier. In one hadith he says, you just say Subhanallah 10 times, Alhamdulillah 10 times, Allahu Akbar 10 times. You do it after the salah and you do it at night. 10 times. 33 is a lot, what do you do? 10. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to do this. And he says, the Prophet ﷺ, whoever does this removes the sins, 2,500 sins in a day. And who would commit this many sins? Is what the Prophet ﷺ says. So the companions, they heard this, they said, Ya Rasulullah, how come we can't do this? What's getting in the way of us being able to do this? He said, Shaitan comes to one of you while he is praying, and he whispers to him to remember this and remember that, until he turns away and perhaps he does not do it. And while he's in his bed, Shaitan continues to lure him to sleep until he falls asleep. If we can't defeat Shaitan when he prevents me from doing adhkar, how are we going to stand up to bigger shayateen? What would we do, my dear brothers and sisters, if we were in the situations of the people we criticize, the leaders of the ummah, the leaders of the Muslim world, politicians and so on? Can we be so certain that we would do better than them? How is our situation with these small things? Abu Darda radiallahu anhu reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, shall I not tell you the best of your deeds, which is purest to your Lord, which raises you among the ranks, which is better for you than spending gold and money in charity, and better for you than fighting in the way of Allah? The companion said, Ya Rasulullah, of course, tell us. He said, it is the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is easy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is kareem. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is generous. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes ease for us. We make things difficult on ourselves. Let us look at these easy, small things that we can do and pick them up. My dear brothers and sisters, this is advice to myself first, wallah, and to you all second. Imagine how different our state would be, how different our condition would be, how different our masjid would be if we just focused a little bit more on these small things. Smiling to each other, spreading salam to each other, treating the sons of others as if they are our own sons, sitting after the salah, putting our phones down, keeping the TV off, saying a kind word to our wives and our children and our daughters, opening the Quran. Just sitting after the salah was rewarded. Opening the Quran without reading it is rewarded. If you can open the Quran 10 days in a row, you're going to be able to read it. If you can read it, one ayah, 10 days in a row, you will finish more than that later on. If you try to skip the small things and go to the big things, you won't be able to do anything. Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, he said, small deeds, if done persistently, will elevate you to the ranks of those who done great deeds. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst them. If we want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to choose us for the great things, we have to show Him, my dear brothers, our ikhlas to Him in the small things. It is a blessing we don't have the trials of the people of Gaza and Yemen or Sudan or everywhere else, because at least for me, I know I wouldn't be able to handle it. And I finish by reminding ourselves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ خَيْرًا يَرَهُ وَمَنْ يَعْمَلْ مِثْقَالَ ذَرَّةٍ شَرًّا يَرَهُ. Whoever does an atom weight of good deeds, they will see it. And whoever does an atom's weight of bad, they will see it. My dear brothers and sisters, forgive me for such a simplistic khutbah for today, but I believe it's important to remind ourselves with the simplicity of Islam, to not lose ourselves in complex connections and talks and all of these things. Wallahi, we just need to come back to the basics as often, as simply as we can. My dear brothers, we outlined why we should not neglect or overlook the small, simple deeds. We explained that our small deeds with ikhlas done leads us to greatness. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will invite us to greater khair when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees us doing good with the small. We showed that it is our small deeds, and perhaps they have the greatest impact on our children, on our community, and our culture. And we have to look forward to the opportunities as they present themselves to do good, the small and the great. Allahumma balighna Ramadan. Allahumma balighna Ramadan. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من الهم والحزن ومن العجز والكسل ومن الجبل والبخل ومن ضلع الدين وقهر الرجال. اللهم اغفر للمسلمين والمسلمات والمؤمنين والمؤمنات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع مجيب الدعوات. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على آل إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. عباد الله، إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. قوموا لصلاتكم وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
استوى اعتدلوا وتراصوا سد الخلل صلوا صلاة مودع. Pray as if this is your farewell prayer. Close the gaps. Stand with khushu' in your salah. Allahu Akbar. Bismillah. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. سبح اسم ربك الأعلى الذي خلق فسوى والذي قدر فهدى والذي أخرج المرعى فجعله غثاء أحوى سنقرئك فلا تنسى إلا ما شاء الله إنه يعلم الجهر وما يخفى ونيسرك لليسرى فذكر إن نفعت الذكرى سيذكر من يخشى ويتجنبها الأشقى الذي يصلى النار الكبرى ثم لا يموت فيها ولا يحيا قد أفلح من تزكى وذكر اسم ربه فصلى بل تؤثرون الحياة الدنيا والآخرة خير وأبقى إن هذا لفي الصحف الأولى صحف إبراهيم وموسى. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. إذا زلزلت الأرض زلزالها وأخرجت الأرض أثقالها وقال الإنسان ما لها يومئذ تحدث أخبارها بأن ربك أوحى لها يومئذ يصدر الناس أشتاتا ليروا أعمالهم فمن يعمل مثقال ذرة خيرا يره ومن يعمل مثقال ذرة شرا يراه. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.